Creationism is the only logical explanation for the beginning of everything. God spoke and the nothingness had no choice but to answer. The church has affirmed this belief through stories, scientific explanations, and the smoke and mirrors of indoctrination. And even though morning worship proclaims this as undeniable truth, the science of creationism is a lie. Buckle up, we have a lot to go over. Creationism is most commonly associated with what is known as the young earth theory. The entirety of everything was created during a 6-day, 24-hour period, with the seventh as a day God delighted in his work. The genealogies in Genesis and the Gospels provide the framework for the math. There are roughly 4,000 years between Adam and Jesus, then another 2,000 years to the present day. The young earth theory would estimate the age of the earth somewhere between 6 and 10,000 years old. But there are major red flags in this basic math equation. The language and interpretation is messy. The word day doesn't necessarily mean a 24-hour period of time. Moses used the word to mean 12 hours, a week, 40 days, a growing season, a physical lifetime, eternity, take your pick. And the genealogies that are heavily relied upon for an accurate timeline of events have issues. The word son could mean son, grandson, great-grandson, and so on. And father could mean dad, granddad, great-granddad. You get the picture. Oftentimes, Jesus is called the son of David, but that doesn't mean he is literally the son of David, but his descendant. This is exhibited in the genealogy in Matthew. It begins with Abraham and accounts for all the descendants leading to Jesus. 3 groups of 14. Why? Because 14 is a numerical value of David's name. He's also number 14 on the list. Patterns repeated are hard to overlook, as early readers would have been smacked in the face with the impossible to miss, not so secret message of the importance of Jesus' lineage. But things start to get really interesting when you apply some basic critical reading skills. Question 1. Who wrote the book of Genesis? We don't actually know since an author is not named, but it has traditionally been attributed to Moses. Question 2. Who was the intended audience? If your initial reaction is you, the modern reader, Moses probably wasn't thinking of a 21st century person that doesn't even use the same calendar to measure time. I mean, what's a Thor's day? And who is this Juno and why is she walking around with a peacock? Moses was writing to the ancient Israelites, which leads to the final question. Why was Genesis written, and, more specifically, why was the creation story written? Let's take a trip to Imagination Land. Moses recently led the Israelites out of Egypt, where for the past 400 years they listened to Egyptian stories, cultural practices, religious beliefs, not to mention the surrounding pagan nations that brought their own stories, practices, and beliefs. Sure, they heard of their own God, who called their forefathers his chosen people, and yeah, they saw some pretty wacky miracles, but it's not like they had a Bible or some ancient papyrus detailing the origins of their people. So Moses filled in the gap. In the beginning, there was nothing. Then bang! An explosion from a singular high-density, high-temperature point began an infinite expansion of the universe. Eventually, after billions of years, a nebula collapsed under the weight of its own gravity and the dust left over formed the planet Earth. Volcanism released water vapor, which condensed as it cooled into oceans, where bacteria began producing oxygen that accumulated in the atmosphere. From these single-cell organisms, an evolutionary chain of events led to the growth of plants and animals, in which these animals would evolve in a specific manner to create the first Neanderthal, leading to the birth of you. Wow, Moses, this is great. Just spot on work. We just have a few questions. What's a Neanderthal? Yeah, and what's a cell? Can you explain gravity? And what about this water vapor? Is it like throwing a bucket of water in the air, or am I missing something? Can you imagine Moses trying to explain modern scientific terminologies to an ancient people who weren't concerned with evolution or DNA or carbon dating? They were only concerned with who this God they kept hearing about was, and whether he was more powerful than the gods of other nations. So Genesis was written in terms they would understand. Take, for example, the vault. It's a common explanation that the vault is describing the atmosphere when the waters were separated into oceans and sky. But the Israelites didn't know about the water cycle, but they did know about the dome. It was the belief that a dome sat behind the sky and was holding water. When the dome became too full, the water would spill over into rain. Scientifically inaccurate, but it made sense at the time. The 7-day creation story works the same. Have you noticed how many religious creation stories sound eerily similar? First there was chaos, then the gods, or natural forces, began working to create the heavens, water, skies, and earth with all the goodies to fill them. But Yahweh was different, because you heard these other stories of creation where chaos ruled and the gods fought over dominance. But in the beginning there was only me with no rivals creating everything you see. And you've even heard that the sun and moon are gods, but they're not. I created those things. Now there are other scientific explanations to the creation of the universe that take both science and scripture scripture into consideration. But spending 6 years and tens of thousands of dollars studying literature at a Big Ten school, my personal preference is the God's temple interpretation. The 6-day creation story was written to describe the creation of God's temple, the heavens his throne, and the earth his footstool. When temples were built for kings or gods during this time period, there was a 6-day preparation before the king or god would take up residence on the 7th. The Gudea cylinders, circa 2125 BC, describes this practice in the Sumerian myth building of the Ningitsu temple. The temple served as a sacred place and visual representation of the presence of Ningitsu, patron deity of the city associated with spring rains. After its completion, Gudea, king of the city-state of Lagash, offered a 7-day consecration ceremony before Ningitsu and his wife Bao, goddess of healing, went to live in their new home. Similar literary examples can be found in the Bible. In Exodus chapters 39 to 40, there was a 7-day consecration of the tabernacle, and after a 7-year construction period of the temple under King Solomon, there was a 7-day dedication ritual. Genesis follows the same pattern. It takes 6 days to create and prepare the throne and footstool before taking up residence on the 7th. Rather than giving a scientific explanation of how the universe came to be, it was the representation that God was creating a place to dwell with his people and the assurance of God's presence. So can an all-powerful God create the entire universe within a 6-day, 24-hour time span? Yes, but that's not the question the creation story was written to answer. Modern science was not the purpose of the text, and forcing scripture to answer questions it was never intended to address muddies the message. God created everything, he has no rivals or equals, and he did it to have an intimate relationship with us.